let's dive into how, the nitty-gritty of how we actually calculate GDP. So it turns out there's two ways to calculate GDP. One is called the expenditure approach, and the other that we'll talk about in a second is the income approach. Basically, the two different approaches come down to, are we counting the money spent by consumers on these goods, or are we counting the other side, which is the business, the income they receive when the consumers spend the money and buy the goods, right? So you can add them up and get the same number by either adding up all the expenditures by consumers or the other side, which is the income for the businesses that are selling the products. So that's the idea, okay? So this one is the expenditure approach. That is, we're adding up all expenditures, or all money, this is called expenditure. We're adding up all money spent on goods and services. Okay, so this is basically from the consumer standpoint, okay? So GDP is equal to, first we do consumption. Now consumption this is all spending by consumers. So when you go to the store and you buy something at the store, that counts in consumption. So most of us, really, when we contribute to GDP, it's in the consumption side because we're buying something, okay? The second piece here, which is investment. So this is investment by companies. So this is when companies, say, buy equipment, right? Whether it's tractors or computers or something like that. Whenever businesses buy things, that's an investment into the future of the company, whether it's a new machine so they can produce more stuff. That's what we count in investment. Now, this is what we call private investment because it's companies and not government. So it is not government, okay? Because the next, let's go to purple. The next category here, which is government, this includes government spending. That is when government buys police cars, right? When government buys fire trucks, when government builds bridges or builds roads, right? All those things that they spend money on to get concrete and rebar and whatever else goes into a bridge or traffic lights or something like that. All that government spending counts in the government category, okay? But we also count what we call government investment. This is sometimes called gross investment. So just be aware of that. It's basically total government investment, okay? But that's going to be when the government invests in stuff. And a lot of times you can think about infrastructure, or if the government is going to get machines and tractors and things like that. So just like businesses will invest and get new equipment and machinery, government can do that as well. So that's counted there, right? So investment only includes the private companies when they buy stuff. Government includes the government spending and the government investment, okay? And the last category here is net exports. So what this is exports. The reason why it's called net. So it's exports minus imports. So most of you are familiar with the idea of exports and imports, but if you are not, exports are what we sell abroad. So if we produce something and sell it in Mexico or China, that's an export, right? When we import something from China, iPhones, laptops, apparently viruses, right? That's called import. So this is stuff that we buy. We buy from foreign country. So it's called net exports because we only count the stuff that we're making and selling abroad, and then we subtract out the stuff that we buy and bring into our country. Okay, so those are the four pieces. So to do or to tabulate all the stuff for the expenditure approach, you just add up all the stuff, all the spending we do when we buy stuff, all the spending companies do when they buy stuff, all the spending the government does when they buy stuff, whether it's spending or investment, and then we add in the stuff we sell abroad and we subtract out the stuff that we buy from abroad and bring in, okay? All right. Now, this little equation here is actually kind of an important one. We'll see it over and over again. And so we don't write it out this way. What we usually do is we say GDP, if I can use the right pen, boy. Okay, GDP, let's try this again. GDP is equal to C, which is the consumption, plus, these pens, come on, plus I, this is the investment part, plus G, that's the government spending and investment part, plus NX, okay? So C plus I plus G plus NX is the expenditure approach equation. So let's move on to the income approach, or what's also called the resource cost approach. So this is the other side where we add up all the income that businesses get when we buy stuff from them, right? When we spend money, that money becomes income for the businesses. So we call that the income approach, okay? Now this one is, again, it's done, but it's a little more complicated, so we don't use this approach as much. Most people tend to like the expenditure approach because it's much more clear. So, but here's how you would do the income approach. So GDP is where you add up what we call aggregate income, okay? That is, you add up all the wages people earn, all the salaries people earn. If you own your own business, we add that up as well, right? Self-employment income, so we have to include that in there as well, right? All the rents that people are paid, so if you own office space and somebody rents from you and they make a rent payment to you every month, that gets counted, okay? All the profits that businesses make, right? And the interest, the money on interest. So if they have money in the bank and they're earning interest on it, that's money they make as well, right? So we add up all those different ways that businesses, have income, okay, and that we call aggregate income. And then we add to it what are called non-income cost items, okay? So this basically has to do when businesses pay some tax, which raises costs, and also depreciation. And actually, let's talk about depreciation. So many of you have probably run across this term in your accounting classes, right? But depreciation represents money the companies have to spend to maintain their equipment, okay? So this is money companies spend to maintain equipment. So let's pretend I've got a company and I just bought a bunch of nice shiny yellow tractors. I can drive around and I can just dig holes in the ground with them. I don't know why. Always wanted to do that. Never gotten the opportunity yet. So, right. So if I buy those shiny new tractors and I start using them and using them and using them, after a couple of years, right, they're not shiny and yellow and new anymore, right? They're falling apart and parts are wearing out and things are breaking, right? So that's what depreciation is, right? It's when things slowly fall apart, slowly lose their value over time, right? And so for a company, I have to spend money to maintain that equipment, right? I have to fix it, I have to add new parts, I have to oil it, or whatever I have to do to a tractor. And so that counts as depreciation, okay? Now the last little piece here is what we have to add in net income of foreigners, okay? That is, we have to add in, so let me just put it right here, net income of foreigners. All right, so what does that mean? Well, if, say, someone from, let's say, Poland is working here in the United States, right, the income they make should count in GDP, right, because they're doing a job here in the United States, okay? But we need to subtract, say, the income an American would make if they were over working in Spain, right? So that American is making income, okay? But it's income in Spain. It should be part of Spanish GDP. So net income of foreigners, what we do is this is equal to, so what we do is we add in the income earned by foreigners in the US, and then we subtract income earned by Americans in other countries. So again, we're only, come on, I need IES. There we go. Come on, pen. Don't fail me. There we go. Good. That is, we basically count what is earned and produced here, and we don't count what is earned and produced abroad. Okay? So that's the income approach. It's a little more messy, and it's generally not used as much. So that's the income approach. Now, let's talk a little bit about value added before we move on to the next section, which is adjusting for price changes. Okay? So what is the idea or notion of value added? Well, actually, those of you who are from European countries will know a bit more about value added, and that is there's this thing called a value added tax, right? So value added means when I'm producing something, I add value to it. So the example I have here is, suppose I'm running a coffee shop and I take, maybe it's 50 cents worth of coffee beans, right? So I take those beans that I bought, say this, scoop of beans cost me 50 cents, okay? I grind those beans, I put them in a little filter thing, I boil the water, I pour the water over it, and I brew the coffee, and then I turn around and I sell that cup of coffee for $2, right? My value added is I took 50 cents worth of beans, added my labor, my work, the sweat from my brow, and I turned those beans into something that somebody valued at $2, right? So my value added is, what is the increase in the price due to my transformation of that good, right? So my value added here is equal to 150, right? I took 50 cents worth of beans and turned it into something that was worth $2. I added $1.50 of value. Now, the reason why I mention taxes in Europe is this is actually the way they do their sales tax, right? We talked a little bit about how, if you come to the U.S. from a European country, the first time you buy something in a store, you might be a little bit surprised because you get up to the counter and you realize, hey, wait a second, there's sales tax that's added on to the price of the good, right? So the way we do taxes here on goods in the United States is that we tax it to the buyer when you pay for it in the store, right? But most European countries do it the other way. That is, they tax the seller each time the seller adds value to the item. And that's what's called a value added tax. So that's actually the difference between sales tax in most European countries and here. It's just where you tax it. You either tax the buyer when they buy it, or you tax the seller when they're adding value to it along the way. Okay? All right. We are on to our last slide of this section. Now, before we get to price changes, which will be in the next section, let's talk a little bit about what the heck is the point of GDP. So, turns out GDP as a measure is only about 100 years old. Right? It started a little, the push to measure GDP basically started a little bit before the Great Depression. Okay? And the idea is we're trying to measure, right? We're trying to measure economic activity. So this is going to be an imperfect thing, okay? So as I mentioned before, we used to actually compute GNP, which is you add up kind of all the income and stuff produced by people of a particular country, right? And again, just as I said, the way we measure GDP, it's only about 100 years old. It's evolved and changed over time. We are still updating and improving how we compute GDP, and it still has problems. It's not a perfect measure, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the next set of slides, we're going to dive into how we deal with inflation and the gradual change of prices over time. So that's it. We'll move on to the next video.